you are, obviously you're gonna make noise when you like and don't like things, and you may wanna boo Trump and Biden, but if you make too much noise, Bobby can't hear what they're saying. So try to put a limit on it so that people can still hear the content of what people are saying.
The one that did the movie Vaxxed.
Right.
Other political parties. I haven't made this decision lightly. It's very painful for me to let go of the party of my uncles, my father, my grandfather, and both of my great-grandfathers. But my sacrifice is nothing compared to the risk our founding fathers took when they signed the Declaration of Independence 247 years ago. They knew that if their revolution failed, every last one of them would be hanged. They chose to place everything on the line. When John Adams put his pen down after adding his signature to the Declaration, he turned to those present and he said to them, sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish. From this day on, I am with my country.
Back with complete coverage and analysis later tonight. And with that, let's turn things over to CNN's Jake Tapper and also CNN's Dana Bash for this first presidential debate.
CNN's hosting its first presidential debate for 2024, but they did not include the independent presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So, this evening, live from Los Angeles, we're streaming the CNN debate, and here I will give Kennedy the same questions that Trump and Biden get. You'll see the CNN debate, plus Kennedy's answers here. And this is all being hosted on Twitter, X we're supposed to call it, and therealdebate.com. But you could say this is the real debate with all the presidential candidates who poll in double digits. Due to the inclusion of Kennedy's answers, this broadcast will be a little bit longer. Now, let's go to CNN as they introduce their broadcast.
From Georgia, a key battleground state in the race for the White House. In just moments, the current U.S. president will debate the former U.S. president as their party's presumptive nominees, a first in American history. Than 30%. What do you say to voters who feel they are worse off under your presidency than they were under President Trump?
I got to take a look at what I was left when I became president and what Mr. Trump left me. We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach in your arm. You'll be all right. The economy collapsed. There were no jobs. Unemployment rate rose to 15%. It was terrible. And so what we had to do is try to put things back together again. And that's exactly what we began to do. We created 15,000 new jobs. We brought out a position where we have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. But there's more to be done. There's more to be done. Working class people are still in trouble. I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I come of a household where...
Thank you, John. I also want to thank Elon Musk for live streaming this on X. CNN made some statements suggesting that he may get sued for that, and I'm very, very grateful for the courage that he's shown to protect freedom of speech in this country. I want to just orient us a little bit about why we're here tonight, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm complaining, because this isn't a personal issue. This is something that should be very troubling for our country. What happened with this debate? My uncle gave the first televised debate in 1960. Ever since then, the debate has been run by nonpartisan organizations, the League of Women Voters till 1988, and then the debating commission thereafter. And this is the first time that a private corporation owns the debate. And it's troubling because CNN is making tens of millions of dollars from this debate. And so they have an incentive to go ahead and collude with the two presidential candidates whose main purpose was to keep me off the stage. And again, this isn't a personal issue. This is something that's important for our democracy. Because Americans feel like the system is rigged. And this is this collusion with a corporation, for-profit corporation, that both those campaigns are going to be pumping in tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising. So it's all a big payoff. This is exactly the kind of merger of state and corporate power that I'm running in order to oppose. And the Americans believe that the system is rigged against them because it is. And this is an example of how badly rigged it is.
Mr. Kennedy, I'm going to we're following the rules here. Your 2 minutes are up. It's your show. You should get an introduction.
I gotta follow up.
We're going back to the debate.
I gotta follow up, right?
Not according to the person in my ear.
Ohio is just going to cause countries that have been ripping us off.
And this is another example of why this debate is a problem, because these two men are the people who ran up the deficit that is causing the inflation. President Trump came into office promising to balance the budget. Instead, he spent more money in office than every president in United States history combined, from George Washington to George W. Bush, 283 years of history. President Biden will beat him. He's already run up $6.3 trillion in debt, and by the time he leaves office, he'll have run up more than President Trump. That's why we have inflation. Inflation is caused because they're printing money to pay for these expenses that we don't have, and that money is then a tax on the poor. That's why we have a 22% hike in home insurance. That's why we have $4 milk, $4 bread, $6 gasoline. It's because of the forever wars and the out of control spending by these two gentlemen. We have a $34 trillion debt now. The interest alone on that debt is costing us more than our military budget. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes will go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100%. This is existential. This is one of the problems that neither of these two will talk about. This is the problem. This is the reason that they need me on stage, because I would confront them with what they did. They were the ones who ran up half of this deficit. Is attributable to those two men, and that's what's causing inflation. We'll never deal with inflation if we don't deal with the money printing problem, and neither of them are going to do it.
Money printing. Back to the debate. Lower taxes, more stimulus. Biden says higher taxes, more money comes.
Thank you, President.
Well, President Trump is, I think, right. He did have a strong economy, but anybody can have a strong economy by borrowing $8 trillion, because you're forcing our children to pay for our present day prosperity with this enormous debt, which ultimately is paid by the poor, by people with fixed incomes. I want to address the area that they veered into, which is COVID management. This is another illustration about why this is so problematical, because these two presidents shut down every business in our country. 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. They have 41% of the black-owned businesses that they closed will never reopen. There was no scientific reason to do this. There was no public hearings. They made a bad mistake, and that was one of the worst financial mistake in American history. They shifted $4.3 trillion upward to this new oligarchy of billionaires that he was talking about. They created a billionaire a day in 500 days. And one of the problems is that CNN was their biggest cheerleader. So, and the same company, BlackRock, the same company, the biggest shareholders, the company that owns CNN are BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Those are the same companies that own Pfizer. Pfizer's the biggest advertiser. So they were all in cahoots in telling us what we needed to do, and we ended up having the worst record of a body count of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths under these two presidents. We only have 4% of the world's population. So I don't know why people are getting awards or they're all patting each other on the back. We literally, whatever we were doing was wrong, because
2
everybody
minutes
else in
are
the
up.
world did
Back
better
to
than
the
us.
CNN question.
Well, I have spent probably more energy protecting medical freedom than any other leader in this country. And bodily autonomy. So I think that abortion should be the choice of a woman, and that I worry about state involvement until the baby reaches viability. And I think the states have an increasing viability outside the womb, and I think the states have an increasing interest in protecting that child. My policy on abortion is called more choice, fewer abortions. And that's because 52% of the abortions in this country, the woman says that economic considerations played the key role in her decision. Every abortion is a tragedy. Many women don't want to have abortions. Over half of them have them because they do not believe that they can care for that child for financial reasons. I don't think that should happen in this country. I have a child care program. As I talked to you before, every dollar that we spend on weapons provides about 2 jobs. Every $1 million that we spend on weapons provides 2 jobs, creates 2 jobs. Every $1 million that we spend on child care creates 22 jobs. It's good for our economy. It's good for choice. It's good for limiting abortions, and that's what I'll do as president.
Be any limit on a late-term abortion?
Yeah, I believe it should be limited. Late term should be limited. Absolutely. That's what was permitted under Roe v. Wade. That's what every European country has the same law, and that law makes sense. If that baby is fully viable outside of the womb, the state has an absolute interest in protecting it.
That we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border.
When President Trump is more right than President Biden, I think almost everything that President Biden said I know to be not to be true, including his claim that he was endorsed by the Border Patrol. And the border, there's been at least 7 million people who've come across the border, and they've come across principally, and this is without the gotaways, which are another 2 million. So those are the people who don't go through the gaps in the wall. President Biden, when he became president, ordered a stop on the construction of the wall. That's the problem. There are 27 gaps in the wall, and I stood in Yuma, Arizona between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning, and I watched 300 people come across, and I interviewed half of them. The first 110 came from West Africa. They're young men of military age. The second 110 were from Asia, from Azerbaijan, from Nepal, from Tibet, from Bangladesh. Most of them were from China. None of them, only 2 people the entire night that I interviewed had asylum claims. Only 2 people, and they were both the only people from Latin America, from Colombia and Peru. I think what President Trump is saying, I don't know how many terrorists have come across. I know the Border Patrol is extremely worried about that. And what's happening is not sustainable. President Biden ordered the deconstruction of fences, the censoring the systems were taken down. I can't tell you why. The long distance cameras were taken down. The night lights were taken down. So there was some decision in the administration to open up the border, and then the 2 laws that were changed under President Biden, and this is the day that he came in, the catch and release law, and
Time is up. Sorry. Back to the CNN debate.
And you said that you're going to carry
The answer was there are millions of undocumented immigrants in the country now. What would you do?
Well, I want to comment on their digressions because I think President Trump is right that there's a lot of bad people coming across. I think that's undisputed, and we're seeing rises in crime that are associated with the immigrants, but more importantly, there's just a sheer number of them. And I think a lot of the Democrats allowed this to happen out of a humanitarian impulse, out of the impulse of compassion. But when you're actually down there and talking to people, it's not a compassionate solution. The people that I talk to, many of them have been extorted, they've been exploited, they've been robbed, they've been raped. We have an immigration policy in this country that is now being run by the Sinaloa drug cartel. The Border Patrol takes, because they've been ordered not to do their job, they're, catch and release. They bring them to the Yuma airport, put them on a plane to any destination they want. This is true, it sounds like hyperbole, but it's not, and they pay their ticket. And then they get reimbursement from FEMA. It's insane. There's 110,000 immigrants now in New York, and President Trump's right, they're being put up at hotels. Many of them are on the street. They have a asylum court date 7 years in the future. They can't legally work, so they're taken advantage of by predatory employers who are paying them $6 or $8 an hour, and those employers are bidding against union shops who are getting paid $35 or $50 an hour, and the union shops are losing the bid. They are camped out in Randall's Island on the playing fields where the children are supposed to be playing for sports. Those fields were closed during COVID. So these kids, these wonderful New York City kids, who are scholarship tracked, could not play their sport, and their lives were, and now the same thing's happening. They can't play their sport because there's immigrants on their fields.
Time is up here. Now, 3 candidates did not answer the question.
Top of the foreign policy, 3rd year. Former President Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he'll only end this war if Russia keeps the Ukrainian territory it has already claimed and Ukraine abandons its bid to join NATO. Are Putin's terms acceptable to you?
First of all, our veterans and our soldiers can't stand this guy. They can't stand him. They think he's the worst commander-in-chief, if that's what you call him, that we've ever had. They can't stand him. So let's get that straight. And they like me more than just about any of them. And that's based on every single bit of information. As far as Russia and Ukraine, if we had a real president, the president that was respected by Putin, he would have never invaded Ukraine. A lot of people are dead right now, much more than people know. They talk about numbers. You can double those numbers, maybe triple those numbers. He did nothing to stop it. In fact, I think he encouraged Russia from going in. I'll tell you what happened. He was so bad with Afghanistan. It was such a horrible embarrassment, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, that when Putin watched that and he saw the incompetence, that he should have fired those generals, like I fired the one that you mentioned. And so he's got no love lost, but he should have fired those generals. No general got fired for the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, Afghanistan, where we left billions of dollars of equipment behind. We lost 13 beautiful soldiers, and 38 soldiers were obliterated. And by the way, we left people behind too. We left American citizens behind. When Putin saw that, he said, you know what? I think we're going to go in and maybe this was his dream. I talked to him about it, his dream. The difference is he never would have invaded Ukraine. Never. Just like Israel would have never been invaded in a million years by Hamas. You know why? Because Iran was broke with me. I wouldn't let anybody do business with them. They ran out of money. They were broke. They had no money for Hamas. They had no money for anything. No money for terror. That's why you had no terror at all during my administration. This place, the whole world is blowing up under him.
President Biden?
I've never heard so much malarkey in my whole life. Look, the fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where, let's take the last point first. Iran attacked American troops, caused brain damage for a number of these troops, and he did nothing about it. Recently, not when he was president. They attacked. He said they're just having headaches. That's all it is. He didn't do a thing when the attack took place, number one. Number two, we got over 100,000 Americans and others out of Afghanistan during that airlift. Number three, we found ourselves in a situation where, if you take a look at what Trump did in Ukraine, this guy told Trump, do whatever you want, and do whatever you want. And that's exactly what Trump did to Putin, encourage him, do whatever you want. And he went in. And listen to what he said when he went in. He was going to take Kyiv in 5 days, remember? Because it's part of the old Soviet Union. That's what he wanted to reestablish, Kyiv. And he, in fact, didn't do it at all. He wasn't able to get it done. And they've lost thousands and thousands of troops, 500,000 troops.
President Trump,
I never
come back
said
to you
that.
for 1 minute. I just want to go back to my original question, which is, are Putin's terms acceptable to you? Keeping the territory in Ukraine?
No, they're not acceptable. But look, this is a war that never should have started. If we had a leader in this war, he led everybody along. He's given $200 billion now or more to Ukraine. He's given $200 billion. That's a lot of money. I don't think there's ever been anything like it. Every time that Zelensky comes to this country, he walks away with $60 billion. He's the greatest salesman ever. And I'm not knocking him. I'm not knocking anything. I'm only saying the money that we're spending on this war, and we shouldn't be spending, it should have never happened. I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled. People being killed so needlessly, so stupidly, and I will get it settled, and I'll get it settled fast before I take office.
President Biden, you have a minute.
The fact is that Putin is a war criminal. He's killed thousands and thousands of people. And he has made one thing clear. He wants to reestablish what was part of the Soviet Empire, not just a piece. He wants all of Ukraine. That's what he wants. And then do you think he'll stop there? Do you think he'll stop when if he takes Ukraine? What do you think happens to Poland? What do you think of Belarus? What do you think happens to those NATO countries? And so if you want a war, you ought to find out what he's going to do, because if in fact he does what he says and walks away, and by the way, all that money we give Ukraine are from weapons we make here in the United States. We give them the weapons, not the money at this point. And our NATO allies have produced as much funding for Ukraine as we have. That's why we're strong.
Mr. Kennedy, the original question, if anyone remembers it was a good one. You say you want to negotiate with Putin. What if Putin says, just let us keep the territory we have and don't have Ukraine join NATO? Acceptable?
That is Putin's, right now, his opening bargaining position. Putin has been asking to settle this war from the beginning. In fact, he agreed to 2 separate treaties, the Minsk Accords, in 2019, which Zelensky ran in 2019 and ran promising to sign the Minsk Accords. And really the only thing Putin wanted was to keep NATO out of the Ukraine. He then, in 2022, right after he first invaded with only 40,000 troops, what President Biden said there is absolute baloney. President Putin did not go into Ukraine intending to conquer Europe. He only sent 40,000 troops. It's a nation of 44 million people. He didn't even want to take Ukraine. He wanted us back at the negotiating table. Zelensky asked the United States to help him negotiate a treaty with Putin. And Biden administration said no. Zelensky then went and asked Israel, and Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, said yes, and Erdogan in Turkey said yes, and they negotiated a beautiful treaty in Istanbul in April of 2022. They signed the treaty. The one thing that Putin wanted was that we didn't put NATO in Ukraine. He didn't want to conquer Europe. And they signed it. Putin was withdrawing his troops, leaving Donbass and Lugansk. And what happened? President Joe Biden sent Boris Johnson over to Kiev and forced Zelensky to tear up that agreement because they had another agenda, which is to weaken Russia. President Trump was part of it. President Trump gave the first $1.3 billion to Ukraine in 2017 of the first offensive weapons. He then sent Mike Pompeo over there in 2019 to say that we're going to put NATO there. So, and then he walked away from the intermediate range nuclear treaty with Russia unilaterally. We had a nuclear weapons treaty that we wouldn't put intermediate missiles in Ukraine or the other former Soviet satellite states. And President Trump walked away from it. So the two of them are equally culpable in the provocations that led to this war. And I'm not excusing Putin. Putin didn't need to go into Ukraine, and he should be held responsible too. We need to look at our responsibility, and it falls both on the backs of President Trump and President Biden.
The European nations together have spent 100 billion, or maybe more than that, less than us. Why doesn't he call them and say, you got to put up your money like I did with NATO? I got them to put up hundreds of billions of dollars. The Secretary General of NATO said Trump did the most incredible job I've ever seen. They wouldn't have any, they were going out of business. We were spending almost 100% of the money was paid by us. He didn't do that. He's getting you got to ask these people to put up the money. We're over $100 billion more spent, and it has a bigger impact on them because of location, because we have an ocean in between. You got to ask them. As far as Israel and Hamas, Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one who wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
President Biden, you have a minute.
I've never heard so much foolishness. This is a guy who wants to get out of NATO. Are you going to stay in NATO? He's going to pull out of NATO. The idea that we have, our strength lies in our alliances as well. It may be a big ocean, but we're ever able to avoid a war in Europe, a major war in Europe? What happens if, in fact, you have Putin continue to go into NATO? We have an Article 5 agreement. Attack on one is attack on all. You want to start the nuclear war he keeps talking about, go ahead. Let Putin go in and control Ukraine and then move on to Poland and other places. See what happens then. He has no idea what the hell he's talking about. And by the way, I got 50 other nations around the world to support Ukraine, including Japan and South Korea, because they understand that this kind of dislocation has a serious threat to the whole world peace. No major war in Europe has ever been able to be contained just to Europe.
Again, Mr. Kennedy, you may have forgotten the original question, which was, as president, what leverage would you use to get Hamas and Israel to end the war?
Well, I would have used more diplomacy from the beginning. I think we have to recognize a couple of things. One is we're a nation of compassion. All of us are heartbroken by seeing the bloodshed that's happening in Gaza. All of us are affected and horrified by the injuries to the civilians in Gaza and the damage to innocents in Gaza. We also have to understand that Israel is in an existential battle now, and that Hamas, which is a genocidal organization, which is pledged to Israel's annihilation, it's pledged to the extermination of Jews. And it does not want a two-state solution. It wants a one-state solution, which is Israel gone. And it actually has in its charter a provision that says that it is against Islamic law to even negotiate with Israel. Oh, Israel's in a five-front war with Hamas, which is a proxy of Iran, with the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, with Hezbollah, these are all proxies of Iran, in Lebanon, and with the Houthis in Yemen. And it's being attacked on two fronts right now. It is at full war with Hezbollah. And we have to let Israel disarm Hamas. We have to support them. Israel's our oldest ally. It is the only democracy in the Mideast. If you can imagine what a world would be like without Israel, for the first time in 80 years, people are entertaining that possibility that in 5 or 10 years, Israel may not exist because they're no longer dealing with weakened forces that they were in the 2000s and 1967 and 1956, etc. Hezbollah is the most proficient guerrilla army in the world, probably in history. Iran is now a superpower in the Mideast and has the capacity to maintain a war. So we need, and to wipe out Israel. We need to support Israel, but we need to use diplomacy, and the people in the White House are not capable of doing that. We need to bring in President Xi, we need to bring in President Putin. We even need to be negotiating with Iran. And the neocons in the White House see this us as a bipolar world where the United States is dominating the world and won't negotiate with anybody. And that is the problem that caused this.
Back to CNN.
I'd like to answer the NATO question. I think that
You've got 2 minutes for what you do with it.
NATO, when NATO was created, it was a bulwark against Soviet expansion. President Eisenhower said in 1959, if we do our job with NATO, it will be gone in 10 years. And NATO has now become an instrument for the neocon ideology, which is the ideology that is bankrupting our country. It's bankrupt. We have a huge military budget. We have double the military budget that we had in real dollars than at the height of the Cold War. That money is not being used for self-defense. That money is being used for world domination and to make America the policeman of the world. And NATO is the instrument of that. I'm not going to abolish NATO. I'm going to change the function of NATO so that it becomes an instrument of peace and not an instrument of U.S. domination.
Would you support an independent Palestinian state?
I think that has to be decided between Israel and Palestine.
Back to CNN.
Democracy. Former President Trump, I want to ask you about January 6, 2021. After you rallied your supporters that day, some of them stormed the Capitol to stop the constitutionally mandated counting of electoral votes. As president, you swore an oath to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend, unquote, the Constitution. What do you say to voters who believe that you violated that oath through your actions and inaction on January 6th and worry that you'll do it again?
Well, I don't think too many believe that. And let me tell you about January 6th. On January 6th, we had a great border. Nobody coming through, very few. On January 6th, we were energy independent. On January 6th, we had the lowest taxes ever. We had the lowest regulations ever. On January 6th, we were respected all over the world. All over the world, we were respected. And then he comes in, and we're now laughed at. We're like a bunch of stupid people. What happened to the United States' reputation under this man's leadership is horrible, including weaponization, which I'm sure at some point you'll be talking about, where he goes after his political opponent because he can't beat him fair and square.
You have 80 seconds left. My question was, what do you say to those voters who believe that you violated your constitutional oath through your actions and inaction on January 6, 2021, and worry that you'll do it again?
Well, I didn't say that to anybody. I said peacefully and patriotically. And Nancy Pelosi, if you just watched the news from 2 days ago, on tape to her daughter, who's a documentary filmmaker, they say, but she's saying, oh no, it's my responsibility. I was responsible for this. Because I offered her 10,000 soldiers or National Guard, and she turned them down. And the mayor in writing, by the way, the mayor, in writing, turned it down, the mayor of D.C. They turned it down. I offered 10,000 because I could see, I had virtually nothing to do. They asked me to go make a speech. I could see what was happening. Everybody was saying they're going to be there on January 6th. They're going to be there. And I said, you know what? There's a lot of people coming. You could feel it. You could feel it too, and you could feel it. And I said, they ought to have some National Guard or whatever. And I offered it to her. And she now admits that she turned it down. And it was the same day she was, I don't know, you can't be very happy with her daughter because it made her into a liar. She said, I take full responsibility for January 6th.
President Biden?
Look, he encouraged them.
Okay, well, January 6th obviously doesn't apply to you, but when would you bring in the National Guard?
Well, let me comment on what they were just saying. I don't know if President Trump obstructed the orderly transition of power, which is one of the keystones of American democracy, and if he did, and he should be punished for it. He should be held accountable. But to me, there's a larger issue, which is that both these presidents swore to uphold the Constitution. They're both wearing American flag pins on their vests, on their lapels. That's easy to do. That's an accessory. That's an accoutrement. It is it's a badge of patriotism. But real patriotism means protecting the United States Constitution. And both of them subverted the right to free speech, which are the most important right. President Biden, 37 hours after he took the oath of office, was ordering social media sites to censor his political opponents. I'm not just talking about me, and I'm not just talking about COVID, but on all kinds of issues like Ukraine, etc. This has never happened in American history. He opened a portal. The FBI, the CIA, CISA, NIH, DHS, the IRS, and other agencies to go in and tamper with social media sites to take out things that were not politically palatable. They violated freedom of worship, the two of them, by shutting down every church in this country with no scientific citation. They violated freedom of assembly with mass regulations that, again, the top scientists in this country, Anthony Fauci, admitted to Congress 2 weeks ago that they were not scientifically based. They shut down the Seventh Amendment right to jury trials by saying you couldn't sue somebody who was involved in COVID cancer, no matter how negligent that corporation were, the biggest corporations in the world. No matter how reckless their behavior, no matter how grievous your injury, you could not sue them. They shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process and no just compensation in violation of the Fifth Amendment. They shut down the Fourth Amendment's prohibitions against warrantless searches and seizures with this track and trace surveillance. That was the all-out assault on the Constitution that we've never seen the likes of that any time in American history. And I don't believe they have the right to wear those American flag pins.
Apply to you, but what do you think about the lawsuits against Donald Trump?
Well, here's what I'd say. President Biden made the point that it's wrong for a federal official to use his federal governmental powers. It's an abuse of power to use that to punish or disadvantage his political opponents. President Biden is doing that every day. They've denied me Secret Service. I'm the first candidate since my father was killed. When my father was killed, Secret Service became available to political candidates prior to the convention. 33 political candidates have been given that prior to the 100-day cutoff, 120-day cutoff, and most of them with polling number a tiny fraction of what I have. President Biden, I am the first candidate since 1968 to request Secret Service protection in which it's been denied. And that is a way of using weaponizing the federal agencies to punish a political opponent. I think President Trump was right. I'm not a fan of President Trump. I'm running against him. I think he was a bad president. But he's right that it's shocking that 51 CIA agents signed this document saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian hoax. And they were accusing the Russians of tampering with our election. It was actually the CIA tampering with the election. I want to say this too. President Biden is now deployed, he's got $3 billion from big corporations in this country. He's using that corporate money to sue me in virtually every state to keep me off the ballot. That's not democratic. But we all, a couple of days ago, let me just finish this. President Biden was criticizing and ridiculing Vladimir Putin for getting 88% of the vote in Russia.
Mr. Kennedy, I'm going to hold you to the time limit.
Let me just finish this point. The way that Putin got 88% of the vote was by censoring his opponents on state-owned television, all the national TV networks, and by making sure they didn't get on the ballot. We should not be doing that here in this country.
I should also add something we are doing that I don't think we should be doing. We said the rules would be the same for you as for them. I've been asking my ear to give you more time, but I don't think that's right, so I'm going to stop doing that. Back to CNN.
President Biden, you have said, quote, Donald Trump and his MAGA Republicans are...
But let me ask, of these two gentlemen, who would be worse as president?
I think you put your nail on that. You put the hammer on that nail perfectly. 70% of the American public say they don't want this contest because neither of them are running on the things that are absolutely critical to Americans right now. The only thing they have, the only argument they have is be scared of that other guy. He's a felon, he's a bad guy, he's going to destroy the republic. They're running on fear. If Americans want to vote out of fear, they're going to vote for these guys. If they want to vote out of hope, they're going to vote out of me because I want to talk. I want to talk about the fact that 71% of the people in this country are making less than the cost of basic human needs. I want to talk about the fact that under their administrations, the top 1% of Americans now own more than the 60% that represent the American middle class. Our country has utterly changed because of them. I run into elderly people who are cutting their prescription bills in two to make it through the week. Mothers who are downgrading their purchases at the grocery store to make it out of the checkout line. A couple in New Hampshire who told me they're in their bedroom or in their living room with a crying baby, arguing with each other about whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $500 sick before they bring it to a hospital. These are kids who come up to me every day and say that one day a week, they have to choose between buying gasoline and buying lunch. These are choices you're not supposed to have to make in this country. And it's them, these two, who are not telling the American people how they're going to get our kids into homes. And that's what
To pass on a similar question, I don't know why they single out black people, but it's certainly true that some minorities in America do not do as well as us white people, and should government do something about that?
Yeah, and I agree with the assessment that inflation is disproportionately hurting black people because they're wage earners. They've got disproportionately fixed income. The border is disproportionately hurting black and Hispanic workers. I hear that every single day. I spent 10 years working with Cesar Chavez during the last part of his life. He had two issues. One was pesticides, the disproportionate impact of pesticides on Hispanics. The other issue was the border, because he understood all of these illegal immigrants coming across the border were hurting the capacity of his workers, American workers, to get good jobs and wages. The issue that they didn't talk about, two issues. One is education. We spend $50 billion a year in the Department of Education, and black kids in this country, it's a crime what is happening to their schools. When I was a kid, we had the best educated kids by every measure of any country in the world. We're now 22. We're throwing billions of dollars, and in inner city schools, most of these kids cannot read or do math at grade level. It is a crime. We need to give them choice. We need to give them charter schools. Neither of them have done anything about it. A last issue, which both of them have aggravated, is the mass incarceration crisis. 1 out of every 4 black men has had some contact with the correctional service. And 60% of the blacks in American jails are there for nonviolent drug offenses. Why? Because President Biden passed the Drug Act in 1986 that he wrote that gave 100 times the penalty for crack cocaine as powder cocaine. It was designed to put blacks in jail. Then he passed in 1994 omnibus crime bill with the super predatory provisions, the mandatory sentencing, the 3 strikes you're out. Those two bills doubled the amounts of blacks in American prison. The amounts of blacks in American prison were steady from the Civil War until
Kennedy,
now.
back to CNN.
And we're moving in directions that are going to significantly change the elements of the cause of pollution. But the idea that he claims that he has the biggest heart up here and he's really concerned about pollution and about climate, I've not seen any indication of that. And by the way, with regard to prescription drugs, one company agreed that they would reduce the price to $35, which I was calling for, one, voluntarily. I made sure every company in the world, every pharmaceutical company, cannot have to pay.
Thank you.
And by the way,
Oh, this is frustrating. This is your specialty, but I object to CNN's biased question, would you take any action to slow the climate crisis, that assumes climate change is a crisis. So, do you think it is, and what would you do?
Yeah, I think that climate change, first of all, I want to say this. There's been nobody who's ever run for president of the United States and gotten anywhere. Well, let's say, I'll even say it more definitively, who has a strong environmental record, a larger commitment to the environment than I do. It's what I've been doing for 40 years. I believe climate change is existential, but I don't insist other people believe that. And I think I focus, and I've always focused on market-based solutions, which I think are the most efficient. Eliminating subsidies for the energy industry, particularly carbon. We give carbon $5.2 trillion in subsidies a year, and creating a national grid system that is robust enough to do long-haul transportation of electrons. And we turn every American into an energy entrepreneur, every home into a power plant with the cheapest, most efficient forms of energy. The market, we need to start by protecting habitat, our air, water, wetlands, soils. That's the most important thing you can do for climate. It's almost all President Biden's program, which the Inflation Reduction Act does a few good things, but the bulk of it is large subsidies to the oil industry and to BlackRock and other really sinister corporations for carbon capture, which is a boondoggle. Carbon capture is a boondoggle. We should not be funding it. We should not be encouraging it. We shouldn't be encouraging any kind of geoengineering of that kind. We should be focusing on restoring our soils, doing regenerative agriculture, protecting our air, our water, our wildlife, stopping the carbon discharge from coal-burning power plants, which are causing $500 billion in respiratory injuries annually, poisoning every freshwater fish in our country with mercury.
Sorry, your time is up. Back to CNN. Dodge, Social Security is going bankrupt. Taxing the rich more won't solve it. What would you cut? Or what would you do?
Well, I agree with you. And Social Security is not an entitlement. Social Security is a contract. Workers put 6% of their income into a fund, and they're told that at 65 they're going to get that money back. It's not an entitlement. It is contractual, and the government, the United States government, would be outrageous if the United States government did not live up to its full faith and credit of paying back those obligations, even if it has to reach outside of the Social Security system to get it. And what we need to be doing is winding down our military commitments. We need to unravel the war machine. We need to solve our chronic disease epidemic, which is the biggest cause, 4.3 trillion. And we can do those things very quickly. I'm going to cut the military budget in half during my first 4 years. I'm going to use AI and blockchain to eliminate waste in government to save more money. And I'm going to get rid of the chronic disease epidemic. And ultimately, that's going to save us a lot of money. But this has to be a priority for us. I also want to say this, that I was astonished by President Biden's claim that we have the best economy in the world. We have, I see kids every day. None of this generation is going to get into a home. And that's going to destroy the American middle class. The American middle class, the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. When I was a kid, our country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. And it was largely because, one, we had an industrial base after World War II, but most importantly, we got every American into a home. And because they were in a home, they had equity, they could borrow money, they could bet on business. That's what's going to help our economy.
CNN has somehow found a child care crisis in America. Somehow Americans raised children for years. Now there's a crisis because it costs too much. Is that something government did or can fix?
Well, the reason there's a crisis is because the economy with the middle class is gone. So in order to pay for a home, you need 2 jobs or 3 jobs. So oftentimes I'm running into people who have 4 jobs between the couples. The couple used to be when you and I were growing up, mom stayed at home or a parent stayed at home and took care of the kids. That doesn't happen anymore now. Both parents, in order to hold on to that home, need to be working. So we do have a child care crisis in this country. And it's because of the destruction that both these men contributed to of the American middle class, and neither of them is offering any way to restore the middle class. Child care for Black Americans, John, is 37% of income, a single child. Oh, and nobody can afford that. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to wind down, I'm going to balance our budget, which is what President Trump promised to do, but I'm actually going to do it because why? Because it's existential. If we don't have the courage to do that, no matter what the cuts are, we have to do that or we are going to cease to exist as an influential nation. And I'm going to, but we cannot cut our way out of this debt. We have to build new industry, we have to build GDP. And one of the most efficient ways of building GDP is through childcare, through guaranteed childcare. There's a 22 times return on investment. As I said, every $1 million we spend on military weapons creates 2 jobs. Every $1 million we spend on childcare creates 22 jobs. And we need to grow our way out of this budget death spiral. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by providing childcare, by taking away $500 billion from the military.
Back to the CNN debate. Them off on CNN. The question is, we do have a big opioid problem, people in crisis, people overdosing, but also people in pain who can't get pain relief because doctors are afraid of the DEA. What would you do?
Both of these presidents miss the point. They're talking about drug interdiction at the border. That's not the problem. In fact, even if you sealed the border, or virtually sealed it, fentanyl occupies such a tiny volume, about 1/200th of all other opioids. You could bring enough fentanyl across the border in a briefcase to kill everybody in Los Angeles. So the fentanyl is going to come in this country. The problem is something much larger than that. It's a generation that is alienated, that is dispossessed, that is depressed, that is suicidal, that is disconnected from community, and that's why they're turning to drugs. And we need to deal with that problem, and we need to reduce demand. And that my signature policy is federally to deschedule it from Schedule 1, where it is now, where the federal government is not allowed to tax it. So marijuana is legal in many states, but the federal government cannot collect taxes on it. But it's legal. It's not going to, whether you can tax it or not, it's not going to affect the number of people who are using it or amount that's used. We're going to deschedule it so the government can start collecting taxes. That will raise $8.5 billion in revenue. I'm going to dedicate that money to building drug rehabilitation farms, wellness farms, restoration farms. In rural areas all over this country where any American go for free to deal with depression, suicidal behavior, alcoholism, drug addiction to illegal drugs, but also addiction to SSRIs, to benzos, to Adderall. We need to reclaim our children. We have a whole generation that's growing up with social media, that's growing up with no hope for their future, They can't get into homes. They can't get meaningful jobs.
2 minutes, Mr. Kennedy. Back to CNN.
As I hope they let me on the stage for that contest.
What do you do to stay healthy?
What do I do? Well, I hike every day. I go to the gym every day. I don't ever eat processed food. I do intermittent fasting, and I try to eat well, so I feel like I really want to be part of that contest.
The concern that both
Stupid decisions. Russia would have never attacked if I were
President Trump, the
president.
question was, will you accept the results of the election, regardless of who wins? Yes or no, please.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely. I would have much rather accepted these, but the fraud and everything else was ridiculous. And if you want, we'll have a news conference on it in a week, or we'll have another one of these in a week. But I will absolutely, there's nothing I'd rather do. It would be much easier for me to do that than I'm running again. I wasn't really going to run until I saw the horrible job he did. He's destroying our country. I would be very happy to be someplace else, in a nice location someplace. And again, no indictments, no political opponent stuff, because it's the only way he thinks he can win. But unfortunately, it's driven up my numbers and driven them up to a very high level because the people understand it.
Well, let's see what your numbers are when this election is over. Let's see. You're a whiner. When you lost the first time, you continued, you appealed and appealed to courts all across the country. Not one single court in America said any of your claims had any merit, state or local, none. But you continue to provoke this lie about somehow there's all this misrepresentation, all this stealing. There is no evidence of that at all. And I tell you what, I doubt whether you'll accept it because you're such a whiner. The idea if you lose again, you accepted anything, you can't stand the loss. Something snapped in you when you lost the last time.
And that's it for the CNN debate. This is your forum, you get the final word. But just one observation is that listening to them, America is in terrible decline. But I don't see people risking their lives to leave America or to go to many other countries. They want to come here. And you say the middle class is disappearing. It's true, it's getting smaller. But the data show mostly because they're going into the upper class. I think America is doing pretty well, and we just need you politicians to leave us alone.
Yeah, I do want to make an observation about President Trump's final point, which I think is a very, very important point for Americans to understand. We are closer to nuclear war right now than at any time since 1962. This week we did something extraordinary that was hardly covered by the press, which is we fired a missile in coordination with Ukraine into a series of missiles into Crimea with cluster bombs, which every nation in the world except for us and North Korea says is a war crime. We dropped them on a civilian population, people who were sunning themselves on a beach, and we killed a lot of children. And the previous week, the Russians are in Cuba firing missiles because they've warned us. We are going to lose the war in Ukraine. I've said that from the beginning. We cannot beat Russia in the Ukraine. They cannot allow themselves to lose that war. They've been invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time they were invaded, the Russians Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. They're not going to let us put NATO in Ukraine. They cannot do it. It's absolutely critical for their national security, and we need to recognize that. And we are pushing toward a war with a nuclear power that says they will use nuclear weapon if they're pushed to the edge. They have 2,500 more nuclear weapons than we do. They have better defensive weapons, and we cannot fight a world war anymore because of hypersonic missiles, we couldn't get 1 million men across the Atlantic. Even worse, we do not have an industrial base like we did before World War II. We can't create weapons anymore. We create small numbers, but nothing like the Chinese or the Russians. This is something that every American needs to understand how close the incompetence of this administration has brought us to war.
Closing
Shut up.
statements now. We have closing statements from.
Can I say a closing
You'll get your
statement?
closing statement right after they get there.
Great.
You have 2 minutes.
We've made significant progress from the debacle that was left by President Trump in his last term. We find ourselves in a situation where, number one, we have to make sure that we have a fair tax system. I ask anyone out there in the audience, or anyone out watching this debate, do you think the tax system is fair? The fact is that I said, nobody even making under $400,000 had a single penny increase in their taxes, and will not. And if I'm reelected, that'll be the case again. But this guy has increased your taxes because of the deficit. Number one, he's increased inflation because of the debacle he left after the way he handled the pandemic. And he finds himself in a position where he now wants to tax you more by putting a 10% tariff on everything that comes into the United States of America. What I did, when, for example, he wants to get rid of the ability of Medicare for us to be able to negotiate drug prices with the big pharma companies. Well, guess what? We got it down to $35 for insulin instead of $400. No more than $2,000 for every senior, no matter how much prescription they need. You know what that did? That reduced the federal debt by $160 billion over 10 years because the government doesn't have to pay the exorbitant prices. I'm going to make that available to every senior all along, or it's happening now, and everybody in America. He wants to get rid of that. I'm going to make sure that we have child care. We're going to significantly increase the credit that people have for child care. We're going to make sure we do something about what we're doing on lead pipes and all the things that are causing health problems for people across the country. We're going to continue to fight to bring down inflation and give people a break.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump, you now have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Like so many politicians, this man is just a complainer. He said, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to get rid of this tax, that tax. But he doesn't do anything. All he does is make our country unsafe by allowing millions and millions of people to pour in. Our military doesn't respect him. We look like fools in Afghanistan. We didn't stop Israel. It was such a horrible thing that would have never happened. It should have never happened. Iran was broke. Anybody that did business with Iran, including China, they couldn't do business with the United States. They all passed. Iran was broke. They had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah, for terror, no money whatsoever. Again, Ukraine should have never happened. He talks about all this stuff, but he didn't do it. For 3.5 years, we're living in hell. We have the Palestinians and we have everybody else rioting all over the place. You talk about Charlottesville. This is 100 times Charlottesville, 1,000 times. The whole country is exploding because of you, because they don't respect you, and they have to respect their president, and they don't respect you throughout the world. What we did was incredible. We rebuilt the military. We got the largest tax cut in history, the largest regulation cut in history. The reason he's got jobs is because I cut the regulations that gave jobs, but he's putting a lot of those regulations back on. All of the things that we've done, nobody's never seen anything like, even from a medical standpoint, right to try, where we can try space-age materials instead of going to Asia or going to Europe and trying to get when you're terminally ill. Now you can go and you can get something. You sign a document. They've been trying to get it for 42 years. But you know what we did for the military was incredible. Choice for our soldiers, where our soldiers, instead of waiting for 3 months to see a doctor, can go out and get themselves fixed up and readied up and take care of themselves, and they're living. And that's why I had the highest approval rating in the history of the VA. So all of these things, we're in a failing nation, but it's not going to be failing anymore. We're going to make it great again.
And he ran out of time. Mr. Kennedy, 2 minutes, closing statement.
In 2013, There was a poll taken that asked young people under 35 in this country, are you proud of the United States? 85% said yes. The same poll taken 5 months ago, 18% said yes. So somehow during the administration of these two presidents, an entire generation of Americans has lost pride in our country and a hope in their own futures. And they feel that way because they see what's happening. They can't get into a home. The first generation in history in America that is going to live worse lives than their parents. They see the vitriol that you saw here, the division, the polarization that makes them disgusted with politics. They're seeing the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that has transformed our agencies from the CIA, the health agencies, the environmental agencies, into sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate. They're seeing the destruction of our soils, the destruction of our air and water. They're watching this happen and the politicians do nothing about it except for hate on each other. If you want more of the same, you should vote for President Biden, President Trump. You know what's gonna happen. You know that. They're gonna give you 4 more years of the same stuff. If you want things to completely change, you're gonna support me. Yes. Because I'm gonna change everything. This is a moral fight. This is a moral battle for the soul of our nation. To restore our moral authority around the world by projecting economic power abroad rather than spending $8 trillion on regime change wars that have left every nation we've touched worse off than we found it. Yeah. And restoring our moral authority here at home. The first day in office, I'm going to, you heard what they're going to do. You don't even understand it. Here's what I'm going to do. Day 1 in office, I'm going to issue an executive order saying any federal official who tells a lie to the American public will lose his job. I'm going to stop the surveillance state. I'm going to stop the propagandizing by our agencies of the American public. I'm going to unravel the war machine. I'm going to unravel the corrupt merger of state and corporate power. I know how to do it. I've been litigating against these agencies for years. And I'm uniquely suited to do this, but I can tell you, I'm going to do these things when I get in there. I'm going to make sure that our Constitution is protected. And AI is deployed to make government more transparent rather than buy government to enslave the rest of us. I'm going to bring AI home and blockchain home because we need these new industries to grow our way out of the debt crisis. This is something that these two aren't even talking about. But if you want everything to change, you'll support me. If you want to vote out of fear, you need to support one of those guys. If you want to vote out of hope, out of inspiration, out of pride in your country, out of restoring the moral backbone of our people and our nation, you should vote for me.
Different kind of debate. I don't know what you learned, but to me the most reliable gauge of who does well on a debate is election day. And I can report after this debate, Biden is down 13%. Trump, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, and Mr. Kennedy are up. Thank you. Good night.
At the rally.
Thank you very much.
Chris, what? Oh, I'm gonna.
Wow.
I don't know where you guys
I would say
I'm surprised that